fine, you know. And then there's Martian. Martians on this planet, in terms of charity, are called saints. Okay, as if they were a whole different species having nothing to do with human beings. I hate that. I mean, it's as if they had nothing to do with us. Okay, it's a point of a continuum, is my assertion. Okay, that there are various predisposing conditions, boundary conditions, that support or get in the way of developing our capacity for charity. Let me toss this in the same continuum. A guy named Scott Peck wrote this book, The Road Less Traveled, which has been on the New York Times thing for something like this long, okay? And he wrote another book called People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil. And he posits that there are some people who we should be calling evil. And that kind of makes me cringe as much as calling somebody else a saint. Okay, people can be saintly, do saintly things. People can do evil things. I'm not knocking that. Calling them evil, calling them saints bothers me. As if they had nothing to do with us. Okay. It reduces our potentialities in both ways, to guard against one end and, you know, what to maybe kind of lean towards in the other. Okay. What I'm working towards here is that charity is one of the components of this ethical standard that I want to try and pull up here. Involves nurturing a sense of responsibility. Okay, I'm trying to define what are the boundary conditions that support responsibility. The ability to respond. I'll just define it like that. You've heard this before, but for our home audience, we're going to talk about being big, okay? Being a big person is somewhat emotionally, is analogous to having lots of money, okay? And so what happens is that if you've got $1 zillion, hey, you want $5 here? Have $5. Like, oh, yes, no problem. Okay, you have very little money. He says, oh, you want my $5? You know, you get very small and petty, okay? Emotionally, if you've got lots of, I don't know what to call them, self-esteem points, shrinks, being shrinks, call them narcissistic supplies, all right, whatever, you know. But when you've got lots of emotional supplies of whatever you want to call them, somebody calls you a bad name, you phooey monster, oh, you whoopee, no, their problem, you know, okay. But if you're feeling like a phooey monster or whatever that is, you know, oh yeah, you know, and you get very small. And like money, you get these emotional supplies, these self-esteem points, whatever you want to call them, either through inheriting them, okay, or sometimes earning them, sometimes bartering, okay, or feeling connected to something that's, you know, going to supply a lot of them to you, something bigger than yourself that has lots of these things. Okay. Some people get this from being part of an organization. Obviously faith, you know, God being Mr. Deep Pockets, emotional resources. Hey, come here. A strictly pragmatic, functional definition of a community would be any grouping of people where the individuals feel there is a sense of mutual support and exchange of support, okay? And it is the memories of being embedded. Our memory, when we enter into novel situations, we work from memory. You know, what's this new situation like? And if you've come from situations that people were way cool and big about, you know, helping each other out, yeah, you cool. You walk into a new situation and you've coming from a lot of small ones, all you're going to see are a bunch of manipulative, moronic Martians walking around if they start being nice to you. Okay. And one of the boundary conditions of responsibility is obviously, you know, if you're physically able to do something, okay, if you're way small and you can't do anything, okay, all right, there's limits. Or you don't know what to do, you know, somebody hasn't helped you out. But one of the biggest conditions is wanting to, caring, to want to respond to a situation. Whether you identify with, you know, if you want a hand, you know. And feeling connected is crucial, okay. What I'm going to be arguing here is that the psychedelics, in two very specific ways, can support that sense of connection, which can manifest itself in this sense of charity. I mean, when you're really feeling rich, I remember my first really serious love affair. You know, I'd been bouncing around a little bit, you know, and I walked into, you know, this situation, kind of frankly keeping track. I mean, all right, I did this for her, is she going to do this for me? And I was just, oh yeah, I'm fine, you know, okay. You know, and was keeping track. Who's giving what to whom, how much, you know. I have this vivid memory. Corner of State and Kingsley. I used to live over on Elizabeth, and I was just kind of walking along thinking, and Kirby, you know, I haven't kept track in, it seems like a couple months here, and I'm thinking, you know, why? Well, I was getting so much out of this relationship. It was just so way cool. You know, it was like I owed her. And the saints, such as they are, I've been studying Mother Teresa, she's a trip. She has this weird sense of abundance, of like giving out of gratitude because she has so much. You know, I mean, it's just, it makes some of us think, whoa, this is weird species is this, you know, I mean, and it seems so different, but I'm pointing out that this is something that is within human range of experience that people can reach for. And developing that sense of connection can support this. And being more responsible, I would like to think, is something that conservatives, that people could sort of kind of line up behind, okay? And that this is something that I'm introducing a standard that I've sort of mined a little bit, but calculating in terms of, if you want to get very pragmatic, a selfish self-interest or something, you know, but something that people could kind of figure and say, you know, stand up and salute. I like that. That's way cool. That would be a good standard for testing whether the use of the psychedelics is really working or not. Now, this is important, to have a standard bigger than the tool. One of the problems with the psychedelics in the past was the experience was so dramatic for people that they, in a weird sort of way, started worshiping the psychedelics. And I cited that in the quote in the last episode, you know. And the point is to have a goal that's bigger than the tool and to recognize the psychedelics as a tool. All right, there's a real big qualification I want to throw in here, okay? Something to the effect of how to do this. I am not trying to say, you know, hi there, you know, give me a camera. Hi, camera. I'm not trying to say, thou shalt use the psychedelics this way and live your life only this way or thou art wrong. You know, no. Time out. No, that's not the plan, okay? B.F. Skinner, one of the most maniacal behaviors that ever was, and didn't particularly care about spirit, to say the least, made a lot of points out of stressing that if you're trying to get people to change their behavior, you don't hit them over the head. You don't do that. Only thing they learn is to run away from whoever's threatening them, okay? What you want to do is make it something that people are drawn towards. Okay, you don't want to hit, the whole concept of sin comes from the word, you know, to, you know, miss a target, okay? Only on this cosmic scale, you know, the ultimate scale. What's the biggest thing you want to live towards, okay? And I want to stress that in a fundamental sense, the word is fundamentally descriptive. and not a basis for hitting people, okay? Knowing, I mean, all right, I don't know how to break this to people. Warning, you know, you don't get to be God. I'm sorry, I know people are going to be really, oh, rats, I want to be God. No, it doesn't work that way. It's something to grow towards. And the point is to not try and beat people up, okay, for failing to try and be aware that these standards exist, to try, basically to try and grow. I mean, biologically, growing is pretty straightforward, okay, you know. And we can talk about what's the goal of growing? Well, achieving maturity or something like that, and eventually dying if you want to get weird. But what does that mean psychologically, socially, you know, to be mature? And being able to grow and take on larger realms of experience that you'd be willing to respond to. But recognizing that, you know, I mean, metaphorically, we're all kids, at least metaphorically, you know. How's you doing? Is this half coherent? I'm going to, okay, all right, thank you. There's one huge qualification I want to toss in here. And to make this point, what I want to do is talk about the Grateful Dead and Deadheads, okay? Deadheads are people who follow the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead, if you don't know, is are a rock group, started in mid to late 60s, San Francisco area, and are infamous for doing a lot of LSD. Yes, it's true. Jerry Garcia was known, their lead guitarist is Captain Trips in his day. Although he disavows doing any illegal drugs now. Okay, fine, whatever. Actually, that is a tendency for people to stop doing psychedelics after a while. Let me toss this in real quick, that there's a tendency, I've stopped doing a lot of them, okay? And I haven't done ecstasy, and I'm still fascinated by that, but it's like, I would tell people that the psychedelics made me bored. You know, it was kind of boring, and maybe that's not quite the right word. It's like I would keep having this consistent experience of the overwhelming insight was that there's all this way cool stuff, way cool, yeah, right, but I don't get to bring it back down with me, you know, when I came back. And that was frustrating. Maybe it was frustration more than boredom, and I just want to say I didn't care, you know. And it's not that uncommon for people who have done a fair amount of psychedelics to start seriously doing sort of various mental consciousness disciplines to try and regain that sense of connection, which I want to spend a little more time getting to eventually. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, I want to talk about where, this is Charlie's assumption about where the Grateful Dead got their name, or even if it isn't where they got their name, why I think it's a great name for them, okay? I've heard another story, which I'm not going to try and quote here. But instead, I want to try and characterize it this way. When, in the 1960s, Timothy Leary was dancing around saying stuff like, you know, turn on, tune in, drop out. And the point was that a simple way of characterizing that, some people were talking about the so-called establishment culture as being the death culture, as being deadening, as making people feel like they were just being told what to do and not getting anything back. One good way of crippling somebody's desire to be charitable is to just keep giving things and not getting anything back that you want, unless you're getting something from another source. And some faith does that for some people. Okay, way cool. But if you don't have that strong of faith, if you don't have a Mr. Deep Pockets or something larger than yourself that's supplying these emotional supplies, you want to barter a little bit. And you can feel really stupid and moronic and manipulated. And in extreme cases, Well, very alienated. If every effort you do feels like it's being just dumped down the toilet, and you do that often enough, you start thinking that your efforts are the sort of stuff that maybe belong in a toilet. A lot of people want to get out of a scene like that. The 60s allowed a lot of economic opportunities for people, and young people were saying, I want out of here. And they were this total denial of responsibility. I don't want to do what the establishment tells me to do. I just want to go off. And it's like playing dead. And wanting to be dead from a culture that keeps telling you what to do, you should do this and do this, and the other thing, and be happy about it. You know, you'd be grateful to be dead to a culture like that. And this same ethical standard that I'm trying to talk about shouldn't be applied just to the psychedelic drugs. It should be held to the culture itself. And some sociologists, historically discussing the psychedelic age, would talk about how LSD wound up being scapegoated for why so many young people were rejecting the straitjacketed culture. You know, man in the gray flannel suit. You know, have 2.5 kids and be happy about it. You know. And I think what's really important, Erik Erikson, psychoanalyst, talks about how in Western culture especially, late adolescence, early 20s, people go through a kind of moratorium, a timeout. You know, just, who am I? Identity crisis. What do I want to do with my life? All this sort of stuff. Do I want to do what everybody tells me to do? And the whole culture, the youth culture, the counterculture, was largely an attempt to say, you know, time out. Is this something that feels real? Especially when off of the psychedelics, people were having this subjective experience of feeling more alive than they scarcely imagined. Okay. Is that coherent? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so this is kind of an important point that one of the problems with the psychedelics is it made people critical of the culture as a whole, about whether is this a place that makes me feel like I'm going to glory in being giving to other people. Okay. And in many hippies, you know, heads, freaks' view, the culture failed. And that might be something to think about. And maybe, again, one of the problems, you know, the so-called establishment is a little worried about these people who start saying, well, what's the point of all this? Okay, doing okay?
Yeah.
Way cool, great. Let me try and talk about two specific ways that the psychedelics can help people live up to this standard, okay, of growing. If you want to characterize it in terms of developing more responsibility, capability to respond, okay, fine, whatever. But wanting to be charitable, okay. Both of these ways are going to involve being intra-psychic, inside the head. Okay, I'll be talking about interpersonal means later on, okay. But the psychedelics primarily help people deal with things in their heads. The first one is kind of a rebound off of how, I'm not sure how much time I want to spend on this, but it's an extrapolation of how the point I was making about the so-called death culture, about all the complaints about how alienated people feel, you know, the abyss of meaninglessness. Bob Seger has a rock song about I feel like a number, okay? And that most men lead lives of quiet desperation. You know, sometimes inside their, you know, home entertainment centers with multimedia where they can live virtual lives, if not quite real ones, okay? And the sense of connection to anything larger can be compromised big time. And one of the things that's undiscountable about the psychedelics is you can feel very connected. Okay. I spent some time talking about that last time, and I'm not sure, it's difficult to put into words. I'm not sure how much time I want to put into this, but it does throw people into this sensation of feeling connected to a universe. Okay. Now, one of the points is this an illusion? Okay, I mean, we see faces in clouds. You know, okay. We have our minds are meaning-making meat machines, okay. And Francis Crick has this great line about how the psychedelics are, because they generate these feelings of connection to the God, we should call them theotoxins, or God poisons. He's a devout atheist, okay. He doesn't think you should have churches or anything on an educational campus. It's a squandering of educational resources. You know, this guy gets his Nobel Prize for figuring out the structure of DNA. You know, one of the last cores of vitalist, spiritual, supernatural areas of biology. I touched on this, and I like the analogy of clouds because, yeah, it looks like a face. Wow, way cool. But we know it isn't. We can put it in perspective. Some people have compared trips to being like, you know, first love. Oh, this was wonderful. It's absolutely great. And then reality kicks in after a while. And again, this was in that quote I offered in the last part about how, you know, with the experience, we start putting this in perspective. And yet, there's still the experience. I led off the last part with talking about the blind man grabbing hold of the elephant, okay? And there is this experience of connection. And if you think about it, I remember one of my psychedelic insights was this incredible point about feeling very conscious of all the different, I call them contingencies of meaning and structure that were supportive. All the redundant things about, you know, the oxygen and the flowers and the people on psychological levels doing various different things to support people, okay? That you know, I mean, I'm not sure how much time I want to get into this, but it's like evolution selected for people who tended to be very focused on the next problem up, okay, of all the things you could possibly pay attention to. And if we just sat around thinking, oh, I'm so grateful, everything's fine, there's nothing going on, you know, there's no growth, okay? But you can get myopic and start losing touch of all the wonderful resources that are there. Now, you can get deluded in thinking, oh, everything's fine, I'm not going to do anything. You know, the elephant also is a fleshy sphincter full of fecal matter, if I allowed before. You know, there are things to work towards and to take more responsibility for, to grow towards, okay? And if we allowed by law people to get in and look at these experiences, we could maybe get a little more agreement over exactly what are we looking at here, okay? But it's against the law to even do that right now, which I'll be talking about, okay? All right. Let me talk about the second way. This gets into psychotherapy. 2 points. One is that when you start, well, I can conflate it with this. One of the characterizations of so-called neurosis is an individual who does not use all of their resources. This is way cool definition of being human, as far as I can figure. Okay. But something about so-called neurosis is when the individual is denying, you know, so-called neurotic irresponsibility. They seem more removed from what they could do than seems reasonable. Let's try and do this quick. Dividing line between what is conscious and unconscious for practical purposes is whether it feels manageable or unmanageable to even think about. Number of windows in the house you grew up in is something that, well, I don't know, but if I think about it, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4. And you get the exact number. It's in your head. It's there. It's boring. Who cares? Okay. But there's more interesting stuff, like, you know, the various traits of your best friend, which you can elaborate and so forth. But what about the worst traits of your best friend? Who wants to think about that? I don't want to know. I don't want to count those things. Okay. And then there's the stuff that about yourself that's not fun. Okay. And here we start pushing into, you know, whether it's manageable to think about, and that if it's too painful, we just is a tendency to, I don't want to think about it, and I don't want to think about the fact that I'm not thinking about it. The primary, you know, all the reasons we could feel ashamed and guilty. Okay, and I mean, we can get into sins of omission for 75 cents. You know, every day I'm killing a family of 5 by buying a newspaper instead of sending it to India. Oh, I'm great. I'm a murderer. Thanks. Yeah. You know, but you know, we draw lines so we don't have to haunt ourselves. Okay. That we're all the heroes of a secret movie running in our minds. You know, and some of us just edit more than others. Okay. And that editing process can get pretty strange about what's going to stay unconscious and what's going to be conscious. Okay. If the dividing line is whether it feels manageable to avoid pain, the primary sources of pain are the shame and guilt for practical purposes. We're not going to talk about physical trauma right now. Okay. And one of the boundary conditions, again, of shame and guilt is that they are both functions of blame, okay? And in turn, blame is a function of felt responsibility, you know, okay? And so one way of avoiding feeling guilty and ashamed is to get rid of the responsibility. That's not my table. I don't, you know, they're not my people. I'm out of here, you know. I mean, and they're aliens. I don't care. In psychotherapy in general, and sometimes under psychedelics with a vengeance, what will come up are the feelings, sometimes of shame and guilt. Okay. For practical purposes, the worst danger is suicide. There are a lot of different reasons that will support suicidal behavior. Roy Baumeister characterized, if you will, the killer motives, the ones that really do it, is when the individual feels that their self-representation, their sense of self, who they really are, is intolerable and should die. Okay, unworkable. How to phrase this? In a panic, you can't think. A suicidal mode, in a sense, is a basic panic mode. There's this wonderful line by a poet whose name, I can't think of her name, just a friend of Sylvia Plath's, where a suicide is like a carpenter who doesn't care why build. They just wants to know which tools, okay? And the suicide is someone who has resolved to not feel anymore and just is focusing on killing themselves as a way of getting rid of the feeling of being an intolerable person, okay? The point of therapy, what's happening is the individual has internalized implicitly some set of standards to judge themselves. They're sinful. You know, they haven't done this. They're not good enough. And the point is they get into this panic, you know, and they can't put it in perspective. And the point is to be able to get a perspective and be able to, you know, look at this, you know, that there are other standards to judge yourself in terms of, okay? And being clear on that. You really, again, this is why it's very tricky. If the individuals listening to this are thinking, you know, maybe I shouldn't trip, okay, doing this. You're right, you know, it's a good idea, okay? The flip side, though, is the lack of insight